Having a good evening. Tonight I want to read to you from Joshua chapter 3, verse 7 through 17. So Joshua had an issue. He was following Moses. Moses, the great leader. I mean, wow. Try to follow someone like that. Imagine trying to follow such an amazing leader. What kind of, how it would be to follow in those kind of footsteps. And so, wouldn't you be tempted following a great leader like that to try to build yourself up, to try to exalt yourself, to try to build your own reputation? A lot of people would be. Most people would be. But over and over again, the Bible tells us, contrary to what we see in popular culture and in our leaders, in our political leaders, in our sports leaders, all sorts of leaders who constantly puff themselves up and are talking about how great and how special they are, the Bible tells us that that's not the way to do it, that we should leave things in God's hands. For example, the Apostle Peter tells us, he says in 1 Peter 5, he says, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. So all your worries about how people perceive you, how people think of you, what people say about you, don't worry about that stuff. You leave that in God's hands. You humble yourself, and he'll take care of your rep. He'll exalt you in due time. So a great example of that is the life of Joshua. He was following Moses, this legendary leader. Remember Moses himself at the very beginning. He didn't feel so hot about himself. He says, God, I can't hardly speak. God says, don't worry about it. And he complains again. Hey, look, I'll send you your brother Aaron. If you need a little help, we'll take care of that. But look, the people are going to, they're going to listen, and I'm going to speak through you. And they did. But Joshua, he was no Moses. He didn't carry down the commandments, even though he had shadowed and followed Moses all this time. So how is he going to follow in the footsteps of this legendary leader? Well, God said, I'll take care of that. And so Joshua chapter 3, beginning in verse 7. The Lord said to Joshua, this is when they're about to enter in, cross over the Jordan, enter into the promised land. This is right after, the spies had gone in the land, and they'd been with Rahab, and they'd found out, hey, the people are afraid, and they know that God is with you, and that your people are going to take over. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of Jordan's waters, go stand in the river. And Joshua said to the Israelites, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. Whew. A lot of ites. See, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the Ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. And you read on, and that's exactly what happened. They stepped in, carrying the ark, and the waters were stopped and the people crossed over on dry land. It was a replication of the miracle of crossing the Red Sea. This was crossing the Jordan. And so the people saw this, and they talked to them about getting a stone. They went over and got a stone, a huge stone, one for each of the tribes, and they set up an altar. And it was set up to be a remembrance. And then you just go on down all the way until chapter 4, the next chapter, verse 14. And it says, "That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses." So, won't belabor the point, go long tonight. Just want to say this. We have a choice in our life. I mean, everybody wants to be valued. Everybody wants to be honored. Everybody wants to be respected. Now, part of that is what we do. Are we honest? Are we hardworking? Do we do our best? Do we work with excellence? Okay, that's our part of it. But then the other part is, how do people perceive us? And we can do one of two things. We can try to control that by creating this PR, this spin machine, and try to constantly talk about how great we are and constantly try to pose. We can try to put up a front. We can engage in all sorts of public relations, or we can do what God says. And he says, "Humble yourselves under my mighty hand, and in due time I will lift you up." And all those years, he humbly served. Joshua humbly served under Moses, being the right-hand man, but not really receiving recognition, not receiving honor and glory. And then when it was his time to be in the spotlight, God didn't say, "Okay, now go out there and convince everybody now how cool and awesome you are and what you did with Moses." Even then, he said, "Let me take care of this. I will exalt you. You just trust me." And I know that we live in a world where so many leaders don't follow God's way. We have a lot of bad examples out there who tell us constantly brag about how great, how big, how awesome they are. But God said that's not the way to do it. So if you want to do things God's way, if you want, you can choose to go your own way and you can reap those consequences. But if you want to follow God's way, he says, "Humble yourself, and in my time, I will lift you up." And you know what? Even though our ways seem right to us and we feel like we've got to take charge, God's ways are what's going to work out best in the end. Trust him. He'll make sure that we get our due. We get recognized, because ultimately he's the one that's most important. It's his approval that matters in the end. Let God be our judge. Let him be the one who says, "Well done."